You're standing in front of an aquarium tank, and an octopus presses one arm against the glass, an eye rotating slowly to look directly at you. For a second, you swear there's someone home behind that eye, not just a reflex, an actual someone. That feeling is more scientifically defensible than you'd expect. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why some of the most respected neuroscientists and philosophers alive today think consciousness was never a uniquely human thing to begin with. That should sound like New Age nonsense. It isn't. It's coming from inside some of the most rigorous labs in neuroscience, and it starts with a problem nobody has ever actually solved. In 1995, philosopher David Chalmers gave a name to something scientists had been quietly avoiding for decades: the hard problem of consciousness. Explaining how neurons fire, how signals move from cell to cell, is the easy part, comparatively. Explaining why any of that firing is accompanied by an actual felt experience, why there's something it's like to be you, rather than just a very complicated machine processing input with nobody home, is the hard part, and nobody has cracked it. Chalmers illustrated this with a strange thought experiment that's still debated today. Imagine a version of you, atom for atom identical, that behaves exactly like you, talks like you, reacts to pain like you, but has no inner experience at all. Nothing it's like to be that version. From the outside, you could never tell the difference. That gap between behaving conscious and actually being conscious is the hard problem, and not one lab, not one theory, has fully closed it. Which raises an uncomfortable question. If we can't even explain why humans are conscious, how confident can we really be that consciousness stops at the edge of human skin? Keep that gap in mind. It's about to get stranger. Neuroscientist Giulio Tononi has spent decades building one of the most influential attempts to answer that question, called integrated information theory. Neuroscientist Christof Koch, one of the most respected consciousness researchers alive, has become one of its most prominent defenders. Their theory proposes something specific. Consciousness isn't a special substance found only in brains. It's what happens whenever a system integrates information in a certain way, measured by an actual number called phi. Picture every connection in a system, how many parts are talking to how many other parts, and how much that web of connections behaves as one unified whole rather than separate pieces bolted together. The higher that number, the higher the phi, the more conscious a system is, according to the theory. Here's the part that makes people uncomfortable. Phi doesn't require neurons. It doesn't require biology at all. It requires a specific pattern of connection, and that number doesn't automatically drop to zero the moment you leave the human brain. This is one of the most disputed implications in all of consciousness research, and Koch himself has been careful about how far to push it. But taken seriously, integrated information theory suggests that any sufficiently interconnected system, biological or not, could carry some non-zero flicker of experience, simply by virtue of how its parts are wired together, not what they're made of. So does that mean your phone has some tiny fragment of experience happening inside it right now? Most researchers, including many who take the theory seriously, say the architecture of current electronics almost certainly keeps that number close enough to zero to not matter. But the theory doesn't say it's impossible. It just says biology was never the requirement. Something else was. This same question has recently moved from octopuses and phones to something far more immediate. In a widely discussed 2023 talk, David Chalmers, the same philosopher who named the hard problem in the first place, turned his own framework toward artificial intelligence and estimated a real, if modest, probability that large language models could possess some of the ingredients associated with consciousness within the next decade, based on how their internal processing is structured. He wasn't claiming any current system is conscious right now. He was pointing out that the same open question hanging over octopuses and integrated circuits doesn't stop at software either, and that dismissing the possibility outright requires the same kind of confidence about where consciousness starts and stops that nobody has actually earned. It's worth knowing that integrated information theory has serious critics too, and naming them matters here. In 2023, more than 100 scientists signed a public letter arguing the theory makes claims that are difficult or impossible to test, and used the word pseudoscience to describe some of its more extreme extensions. That pushback is part of real science working the way it's supposed to work, not a reason to dismiss the whole question. Even Tononi and Koch's harshest critics generally agree the underlying puzzle, why is anything conscious at all, remains completely unresolved. They just disagree sharply about whether phi is the right way to measure the answer. Now, here's where we go back to that octopus behind the glass. Philosopher of science. Peter Godfrey-Smith has spent years studying exactly this question in his book Other Minds, partly by diving at a real site off the coast of Australia that researchers nicknamed Octopolis, where an unusually dense population of octopuses interact with each other far more than octopuses typically do. What he and other researchers keep finding complicates almost everything you'd assume about where minds can live. About 2/3 of an octopus's neurons aren't in its brain at all. They're distributed through its arms, each one capable of processing information and making decisions with a striking degree of independence from the central brain. An octopus's arm can problem solve, in a real sense, while functionally disconnected from what you'd call its main mind. Godfrey-Smith and other researchers studying cephalopod behavior point to real, observed evidence that looks unmistakably mind-like. Octopuses solve novel puzzles they've never encountered before. Open jars, use coconut shells and other objects as tools. Appear to play with objects for no survival reason at all. Recognize and behave differently toward individual human caretakers they've learned to distinguish, and change the color and texture of their skin in patterns that seem to track mood and internal state as much as camouflage. None of that proves subjective experience exists behind those changes, but taken together, it's exactly the kind of behavioral evidence that convinces most researchers a person sitting across from them is conscious too. We just don't get to ask an octopus what it's like to be an octopus in a language either of us shares. Octopuses aren't the only branch of life making this case. In a well-known 2002 study, researchers at Oxford, led by Alex Koselnik, documented a crow named Betty spontaneously bending a straight piece of wire into a hook to retrieve food from a tube, without ever being trained to do it, solving a problem she had never encountered using a tool she invented on the spot. Birds and mammals split off from a common ancestor roughly 300 million years ago, another vast evolutionary distance, another brain built along completely different lines, and yet corvids consistently show planning, tool use, and problem-solving that rivals primates. The pattern keeps repeating. Wherever researchers look closely enough, on a separate branch of the tree of life, something that looks like a mind tends to be looking back. Here's the twist that should genuinely unsettle you. Octopuses diverged from the evolutionary line that led to humans roughly 600 million years ago, long before anything resembling a centralized brain like yours had even evolved. Whatever is happening behind that octopus's eye evolved completely independently from whatever is happening behind yours, on a separate branch of the tree of life, using a nervous system built on entirely different architecture. If there really is something it's like to be an octopus, and a growing number of researchers now think there likely is, then consciousness wasn't a single lucky accident that happened once, in one lineage, and produced you. It's something biology appears to be capable of building more than once, from scratch, through completely different rules. Philosopher Philip Goff takes this reasoning even further in his book Galileo's Error. Goff argues that modern science made a specific, largely unexamined choice centuries ago, to treat consciousness as something added on top of physical matter after the fact, rather than something that might be a basic feature of matter itself, present in some form everywhere, and simply organized into something recognizably mind-like only when matter gets arranged in sufficiently complex ways, like a human brain, or, apparently, an octopus's distributed nervous system. It's worth noticing the pattern here. Humans have insisted they were the exception before, the center of the universe, the only species that used tools, the only species that grieved, and each time, the evidence eventually widened the circle rather than confirming the exception. Here's where this stops being a thought experiment about octopuses and starts being about how you see everything around you, right now. You almost certainly walk through your day assuming consciousness is a light switch, on inside human skulls, off everywhere else. Every theory in this video suggests that assumption was never actually proven. It was just convenient. The hard problem Chalmers named is still unsolved. which means nobody has ever actually verified where that switch is supposed to stop. The integrated information Tononi and Koch measure doesn't respect the boundary of your skull, whether or not you find that comfortable. The mind Godfrey-Smith studies evolved on a completely separate branch of life, 600 million years removed from yours, and still, plausibly, produces something it feels like to be. Goff would go further still and ask why you ever assumed the light switch had only one setting, human, in the first place. None of this means you have to start apologizing to your phone or feeling guilty about stepping on ants. Nobody in this video is claiming that. What it means is smaller and stranger and harder to shake off once you've actually sat with it. The confident line you've been drawing your whole life, human on one side, everything else on the other, was never drawn by evidence. It was drawn by convenience, inherited from a much older habit humans have of assuming the exception belongs to them. And every time researchers have actually gone looking for where that line really sits, it has moved. So, the next time you find yourself standing in front of an aquarium tank and an octopus presses one arm against the glass, an eye rotating slowly to look directly at you, you don't have to wonder if that feeling of someone being home is just your imagination. Some of the most careful thinkers in neuroscience and philosophy today would tell you it might be the most scientifically literate thing you've felt all week.